The job was supposed to be 3 months, June through August, front desk at the Braeburn Inn, a 42-room property sitting where County Road 9 dead ends into the boundary of the Cascadia National Forest. The owner, a woman named Maren Fawcett, who lived in Bend and managed the place remotely through a property management app, had posted the listing on 3 different job boards. I found it on the cheapest one. The pay was $15.50 an hour. The schedule was Thursday through Monday, 6 p.m. to 6 a.m., and the listing said lodging was included. A converted maintenance room behind the office with a camp bed, a hot plate, and a window that looked out on the dumpster enclosure. I applied on a Tuesday. She called me Wednesday. I drove up Friday. I'd been out of consistent work for about 4 months at that point. I'd left a property management company in Medford after a disagreement with a supervisor that I won't pretend was entirely his fault. And the jobs I'd been cycling through since: dishwasher at a steakhouse, seasonal shelf stocker at a hardware chain, one miserable week doing parking lot seal coating, hadn't added up to anything you could build a month around. The Braeburn job came with a room and a set schedule, and I didn't ask many questions during the phone interview. Maren told me June was slow. She said most guests were weekend hikers or Forest Service personnel passing through. She said the overnight shift was mostly just being present in case someone arrived late, and that I'd have long stretches with nothing to do. She was right about that part. The inn was the kind of place that had probably been charming once. 2 stories, wood-sided, painted dark green, with cream trim that had started to peel along the eaves. The parking lot was gravel, big enough for maybe 20 cars, but rarely holding more than 4 or 5. There was a small lobby with a stone front gas fireplace, 2 armchairs that smelled faintly of mildew, a rack of Forest Service trail maps, and a front desk made of knotty pine with a surface that had been varnished so many times it felt almost soft. Behind the desk was the office: a computer, a printer, a keycard encoder, a binder of procedures, and a phone system with 8 lines, 1 for each wing and floor combination. The building was shaped like a blocky U, with the lobby and office at the base, and 2 wings extending back toward the tree line. First floor, rooms 101 through 114. On the left wing, 115 through 128 on the right. Second floor mirrored the layout, 201 through 228. Most of the second floor stayed closed during the off-peak weeks. Maren had me keep those rooms locked and the hallway thermostat set to 55 to save on electric. The property management system was called LodgeStar. It ran on a desktop computer that was at least 8 years old, and the software itself felt older than that. Green and white interface, function key navigation, no mouse support. It tracked reservations, room assignments, check-ins, checkouts, and maintenance flags. Every room had a status: vacant clean, vacant dirty, occupied, out of order, or blocked. When I checked someone in, I'd pull up their reservation, confirm the ID, encode a key card, change the room status to occupied, and hand them a little folded card with the Wi-Fi password and breakfast hours. Breakfast was continental, self-serve, set up in the lobby between 7 and 9 by the morning shift woman, Patrice, who also handled housekeeping. I never overlapped with Patrice by more than 20 minutes. She came in at 5:40. I gave her the overnight summary, and I walked back to my room and slept until mid-afternoon. For the first 2.5 weeks, the job was exactly what Maren had described. Quiet, predictable. Most check-ins happened before I came on shift. The evening side desk person, a college kid named Oren who drove up from Chemult, would leave me a post-it with any expected late arrivals. Usually there were none. I'd sit at the desk with a book or my phone, do a walkthrough of the ground floor hallways at 10 and again at 2, check that the lobby doors locked properly at midnight, and wait. The woods behind the building made noise, wind in the Douglas firs, the occasional animal moving through the brush. But the building itself was still. The ice machine on the first floor of the left wing cycled every 40 minutes or so with a deep mechanical shudder that I could hear through the office wall. The lobby clock ticked. The Lodge Star system hummed on its beige tower under the desk. It was the kind of quiet that felt heavy at first and then just became normal. The first thing I noticed was on a Wednesday night in the third week, June 18th or 19th, I think. I was reading at the desk around 1:15 a.m. The building had 4 occupied rooms, all checked in before my shift, all quiet. I heard the keycard encoder click. It was sitting on the desk to my left, a small gray box about the size of a paperback book with a slot on top for the card. It made a specific sound when it encoded. A short mechanical snap, followed by a brief electronic tone. I'd heard it dozens of times during check-ins. The sound was distinct. I looked at it. The power light was on, green and steady. No card was in the slot. The Lodge Star screen was on the main dashboard, showing the 4 occupied rooms in blue and everything else in gray. I hadn't touched the encoder in hours. I watched it for a minute, maybe longer, then reached over and unplugged it. Plugged it back in. The power light cycled off and on. Nothing else happened. I wrote it off as an electrical hiccup. The building's wiring was old enough that the lights in the left wing sometimes flickered when the ice machine kicked on. 2 nights later, a Friday, the phone system rang at 2:40 a.m. Not the front desk line, line 6. I knew the phone layout by then. Lines 1 through 4 were the front desk, Marin's office line, the maintenance number, and an outgoing only line. Lines 5 through 8 corresponded to the wings. 5 was first floor left, 6 was first floor right, 7 was second floor left, 8 was second floor right. The second floor was closed. The first floor right wing had 1 occupied room that night, 121, a couple from Eugene, who'd checked in around 4 p.m. Line 6 ringing meant someone on that wing was calling the front desk. I picked up. There was no voice on the other end. Not silence exactly. I could hear the line was open. There was a faint ambient hum, the kind of background tone you hear on an active connection in a building with old wiring. I said, "Front desk, this is Nathan. Can I help you?" Nothing. The hum continued for maybe 10 seconds. Then the line disconnected. I checked the phone's caller ID readout. It showed the room the call had originated from, a 127. Room 127 was vacant. I'd confirmed it myself during my 10 o'clock walkthrough. The door was closed, the hallway was dark, and when I tested the handle, it was locked. The Lodge Star system showed 127 as vacant clean. No reservation, no maintenance flag, no reason for the phone in that room to be active, let alone dialing the front desk. I sat with that for a while. The rational explanation was a wiring cross, an old PBX system routing a signal to the wrong extension. It happened in older buildings. I dealt with phone quirks in the Medford job. I logged it in the overnight notes. Line 6, call at 2:40, showed room 127, no voice, likely PBX error. I didn't walk down to check the room. I'm not sure why. At the time, I told myself it wasn't worth the effort for a phone glitch. The next night, Saturday, I had 3 late check-ins between 8 and 10 p.m., a solo hiker, a couple with a dog, and a Forest Service biologist who was doing something with elk migration corridors and needed a room for 4 nights. By midnight, I had 7 rooms occupied. All first floor. The second floor was still closed and dark. I did my walkthrough at 10, found nothing unusual, came back to the desk, and settled in. At 1:55 a.m., Lodge Star updated. I wasn't looking at the screen when it happened, but the system made a soft chime, the same notification sound it produced when a room status changed. I turned to the monitor. Room 209 had changed from blocked to occupied. I stared at that for a long time. Room 209 was on the second floor of the right wing. The second floor was closed. I had not encoded a key card for that room. I had not changed its status. No one had checked in. The system required a manual status change. You had to navigate to the room screen, highlight the status field, and press F4 to cycle through the options. It was not something that happened passively or by accident. I pressed F6 to pull up the room detail screen for 209. The status showed occupied. The check-in time was listed as 1:55 a.m. The guest name field, which I would normally type manually during check-in, was not blank. It contained a single character, a lowercase letter D. I sat there for probably 5 minutes without moving. The lobby was silent. The clock ticked. The ice machine shuddered distantly in the left wing. I could hear the transformer hum of the computer tower under the desk. My first clear thought was that someone had remote access to Lodge Star, Marin, or a previous employee, or someone who'd left a session open. The system was networked only to the local property server, but I didn't know enough about the back end to rule out remote access. I picked up the phone and nearly called Marin, then looked at the time and put it down. I opened the overnight log binder and wrote 1:55 a.m., room 209. Status changed to occupied, no check-in performed. Guest field shows D, possible system error or remote access. Second floor closed, did not investigate. I did not go upstairs. In the morning, I told Patrice about it. She'd worked at the Brayburn for 2 seasons and knew the building better than I did. She listened, nodded slowly, and said, "The system does weird things sometimes. Marin knows about it. She had someone yet look at the server last October and they couldn't find anything wrong." I asked her if room statuses had changed on their own before. She paused in a way that felt considered rather than confused, and then said, "I don't work nights." She said it simply, without emphasis, but something in the way she returned to folding towels made me feel like the conversation was over. I emailed Marin that afternoon, described the phone call from 127 and the status change on 209. She replied within an hour, which was fast for her. The email was short. She said the PBX had been temperamental for years, and that Lodge Star had a known issue with status fields reverting or updating during off-hours maintenance cycles. She told me to manually correct any erroneous status changes and log them. She did not address the letter in the guest name field. I read her email 3 times, trying to decide whether it was reassuring or dismissive, and eventually decided it was both. I corrected room 209's status back to blocked. The system accepted the change without any issue. I went to sleep. That night, Sunday was quiet. Monday was quiet. I drove down to Chemult on my days off, did laundry at a coin place, ate at a diner, and sat in my truck in the parking lot of a Family Dollar, reading a thriller I'd found in the lobby, Lost and Found. Normal things. The Brayburn felt distant and small from 60 miles away. I almost convinced myself the week's oddities were exactly what Marin had said. Old systems doing old system things. I came back on Thursday. Oren's post-it said 2 rooms occupied, no late arrivals expected. The building was calm. I did my 10 o'clock walk, found nothing, came back, read. At 11:40, the keycard encoder clicked again. Same sound, the snap, the tone. No card in the slot. I watched it for a full minute this time, then reached over and pulled a blank card from the stack and slid it into the slot. The encoder activated. The light on the front turned from green to amber, the way it did during a write cycle, then back to green. The card ejected slightly, the way encoded cards always did. I picked it up. A normal key card, white plastic, Brayburn in, printed on one side in dark green ink. I turned it over. I walked to the back office where we kept the card reader, a diagnostic tool that Marin had mentioned during my orientation but that I'd never used. It was in the bottom drawer of the filing cabinet, still in its box. I plugged it into the computer's USB port, inserted the card, and ran the read function. The card had been encoded for room 211, second floor, right wing, closed wing. The access window on the card was set for that night, Thursday, June 26th. From midnight to 6 a.m., I put the card in my shirt pocket. I don't know why I did that instead of putting it in the discard pile. Something about it felt like evidence, though I couldn't have told you evidence of what. At 12:15 a.m., Lodge Star chimed. Room 211. Status changed from blocked to occupied. Check-in time, 12:15. Guest name field. D, the same single letter. My hands were steady, which surprised me. I picked up the desk phone and called line 8, the second floor right wing line. It rang 6 times and went to the automated voicemail greeting that I'd recorded during my first week. You've reached the front desk of the Brayburn Inn. Please leave a message or dial 0 for assistance. The fact that it went to voicemail meant no one had picked up in any room on that wing. But the line had connected. The PBX had routed the call to the second floor right wing as though the wing were active. I hung up. Sat there, the lobby was empty, the glass doors reflected the desk back at me. My own shape, the glow of the monitor, the keycard encoder's green light. Outside, the parking lot was 3 cars. Mine, the hiker in 106, and the biologist in 119. The tree line beyond the gravel was a black wall. No wind that night, completely still. I want to be precise about what I did next because it matters. I did not go upstairs. I did not investigate room 211. What I did was open the Lodge Star event log, a feature I'd discovered while clicking through menus during a slow night the previous week. The event log recorded every status change, every key card encoding, every phone system event time-stamped and sequential. I scrolled back through the previous 4 weeks. The log was long and most of it was routine. My own check-ins and check-outs, Oren's daytime activity, Marin's occasional remote status corrections, but scattered through the overnight entries I found them. Status changes on closed rooms, always second floor, always the right wing, always between midnight and 3 a.m. The rooms varied: 203, 207, 209, 211, 215, 222. The guest name field in every case was the same, D. The changes had been happening since before I started. The earliest one in the visible log was from May 9th. The status changes always reverted by morning, either manually corrected by someone, or, in the cases before my employment, apparently correcting themselves. I counted. In 41 nights of log data, the status change had occurred 17 times. There was one more thing. On 4 of those 17 occasions, the log showed a key card encoding event within 30 minutes of the status change. The cards had been encoded for the same room that had changed status. I had not performed any of those encodings. I hadn't even been employed for the earliest ones. I printed the log, 23 pages. I folded them and put them in the filing cabinet in my room behind the office under a stack of old comment cards. Then I went back to the desk and sat there until Patrice arrived at 5:40. I didn't tell her about the log. I told her that 211 had shown an erroneous status change and that I'd corrected it. She nodded the same way she had before. This time I watched her face more carefully. There was something there, not fear, not avoidance, something closer to patience, like she was waiting for me to arrive at a conclusion she'd already reached and decided not to share. Over the next 2 weeks, I kept a separate record, not in the official overnight log, in a composition notebook I bought at the Family Dollar, in Tumult. I logged every anomaly with the time, the room number, and any associated system events. The pattern was consistent every 2 to 3 nights. Between midnight and 3 a.m., a room on the second floor right wing would change to occupied. The guest name was always D. On roughly a quarter of those occasions, the key card encoder would activate on its own. Twice more, the phone rang from a second-floor room, once from 207, once from 222. Both times, open line, ambient hum, no voice, disconnection after 8 to 12 seconds. I want to talk about what the building felt like during those hours because the system anomalies were only part of it. On nights when the status change occurred, the building felt different. I don't mean that in a dramatic way. I mean that the quality of the silence changed. Normally, the Brayburn at 2 a.m. had a specific texture. The ice machine, the clock, the low-grade HVAC hum, the occasional creak of the building settling in the cool mountain air. On the nights when Lodge Star registered an occupant upstairs, there was an additional layer. Not a sound exactly, more like the presence of sound, the way you can sometimes tell a television is on in another room even when the volume is off. A density in the air, a faint pressure that I felt more in my chest than in my ears. I started paying attention to the ceiling. My desk was directly below the second floor right wing hallway. The ceiling was acoustic tile, standard drop ceiling grid. On the nights I'm describing, I would sometimes hear, or think I heard, a single faint impact from above. Not footsteps, not repeated, just one muted thud, like something being set down on a carpeted floor. It happened once per night at most. Sometimes it didn't happen at all. When it did, it was always after the status change and before the system corrected itself in the morning. On July 7th, I broke my own rule and went upstairs. I need to explain why. That evening, before my shift started, I'd found something in the maintenance closet on the first floor of the right wing. I'd gone in to grab a replacement bulb for the hallway sconce near room 122, and on the shelf behind the bulb boxes there was a binder. Not a Brayburn branded binder, a plain, black, 3-ring binder with no label. I opened it and found a stack of printed pages, maybe 40 sheets. They were Lodge Star event logs. The same kind I'd printed myself. These were older. The dates ran from the previous September through mid-December. Someone had highlighted certain entries in yellow. Status changes on second floor right wing rooms. The guest name field on every highlighted entry was the same. D. At the back of the binder, behind the printed logs, there was a single sheet of Brayburn stationery. Handwritten, in neat block letters, no signature, no date. It read, "It checks in, it doesn't check out, it isn't there when you look. The room is always empty. The system is always right." Don't try to understand the difference between those two things. Just correct the status in the morning and move on. It has never come downstairs. I read that note 6 times. Then I put the binder back on the shelf behind the bulb boxes and replaced the burned out sconce light and went back to the desk and sat there with my hands on my knees. The note had been written by someone who'd worked the overnight shift before me. I didn't know who. Marin had mentioned during my orientation that the previous night person had left in April. Personal reasons, she'd said, in the same flat tone she used for everything. I hadn't asked for details. Now I wished I had. That night, Lodge Star chimed at 1:22 a.m., room 215. Status, occupied. Guest name, D. I stood up. I took the encoded key card from my shirt pocket. I'd been carrying the one the encoder had produced for room 211, still in my pocket for 11 days. I walked out of the lobby, down the first floor right-wing hallway, past the occupied rooms, where I could see thin lines of darkness under the doors, to the stairwell at the far end. The stairwell light was on a motion sensor. It clicked on when I pushed through the fire door, fluorescent and blue-white, humming at a frequency I could feel in my teeth. The second-floor hallway was dark. The overhead lights were off. I'd never turned them on because the floor was closed. The only illumination came from the green glow of the exit signs at each end of the corridor and the small red LED on each room's door lock. I stood at the top of the stairs and let my eyes adjust. The hallway stretched away from me, doors on both sides, carpet that had been dark red once and was now a murky brown in the low light. The air was different up here, cooler than it should have been given that the thermostats were set to 55. And it smelled not unpleasant, not like mold or decay, more like stone. Like the air inside a cave or a concrete stairwell in a parking garage. Mineral, damp without being wet. Room 215 was the 7th door on the left. I walked toward it. My footsteps were almost silent on the old carpet, but the floor beneath it creaked in 2 places, and each creak sounded enormous in the stillness. The red LED on 215's lock was steady, the same as every other door. No sound from inside. No light under the door. I stood in front of it and pressed my ear to the surface. The door was cold, not cool, cold like it had been refrigerated. I held my breath and listened. Nothing. A complete, padded nothing. Not the muffled quiet of an empty hotel room. I knew what that sounded like. This was denser, like the door opened onto a space that was significantly larger than a hotel room. The silence had depth to it. I put my hand on the handle and pressed down. Locked. Of course it was locked. The room was on the closed floor and had never been issued a key card. The key card in my pocket was for 211, not 215. I stood there with my hand on the cold handle, and then I did something I hadn't planned. I knocked. 2 knocks, short, with the second knuckle of my right hand. The kind of knock you'd use at a front desk to get someone's attention. The sound died immediately. No echo, no resonance, like knocking on a wall of sand. Then the phone at the front desk rang. I could hear it from the second floor, faintly, through the stairwell, the specific double ring of the front desk line. I waited. It rang 4 times and stopped. I stood in the hallway for another 30 seconds, my hand still on the door handle, and then I walked back to the stairs, back down to the first floor, back through the fire door, back to the lobby. The phone was silent. I checked the caller ID. The last incoming call was from room 215, timestamped 3 minutes ago. I sat down, the lobby clock ticked, the ice machine cycled. The keycard encoder's green light glowed steady and small. On the Lodge Star screen, room 215 still showed occupied. I did not go back upstairs. I waited until 5:40, told Patrice that 215 had flagged an erroneous status change, watched her nod, and went to my room. I did not sleep well. The composition notebook was on the camp bed where I'd left it, and I opened it and wrote down everything that had happened, including the note in the binder, including the cold door, including the phone call. Then I lay on my back and stared at the ceiling and listened to the building settle into its daytime silence, which was different from its nighttime silence in ways I was becoming increasingly able to distinguish. The next night was quiet. So was the one after. I started to wonder if going upstairs had changed something. If my presence on the second floor had disrupted whatever pattern had been running undisturbed for months. By the third quiet night, I'd almost relaxed. On the fourth night, a Thursday, I was reading at the desk at 2:10 a.m. when the printer activated. The printer was an old HP LaserJet connected to the Lodge Star system, used primarily for printing registration forms and receipts. It sat on a shelf behind the desk, and when it woke from sleep mode, it made a characteristic grinding sound as the drum warmed up. I heard that sound and turned around. The printer was feeding a page. I watched it emerge from the output tray, a single sheet, standard letter size. It was a registration form. Lodge Star generated, formatted the same way every check-in form looked. Guest name, room number, arrival date, departure date, rate, method of payment. The fields were filled in. Room 219, arrival date, tonight's date. Departure date, blank, rate, 0 method of payment, blank, guest name, D. Renault. That was the first time the name had been more than a single letter. I held the page under the desk lamp. It was crisp, freshly printed, warm from the drum. Absolutely normal in every physical respect. The name stared up at me. D. Renault. I went to Lodge Star and checked room 219. Blocked, unchanged, no status update, no chime. The system showed no record of generating the printout. I checked the print queue on the computer. Empty. I folded the registration form and put it in my composition notebook. Over the next week, I tried to find out if anyone named D. Renault had ever been a guest at the Brayburn. The property management system only held data for the current calendar year, and Marin had told me during orientation that older records were archived on an external drive she kept at her home in Bend. I searched the current year. No Renault. I checked the lost and found log, the maintenance request records, the comment cards in the filing cabinet. Nothing. I searched online during a slow stretch one night. Just the name, in quotes, with Brayburn and the county name. Nothing relevant came back, but I did find one thing, and I want to describe it carefully because I've thought about it a lot. In the desk drawer, beneath a layer of rubber bands and old pens, there was a guest comment card. The Brayburn's comment cards were small, half-sheet, cream-colored, with the INS logo at the top and a few lines for feedback. This one was blank on the printed side. On the back, in handwriting I didn't recognize, neither the block letters from the binder note, nor Marin's distinctive slanted script. Someone had written a single line, 219 is not a room. That was all. No date, no context, no name. The ink was ballpoint, blue, slightly smeared as though the writer had been left-handed. The card was soft at the edges, handled more than once. I put it with the registration form in my notebook. I spent a long time over the next few nights thinking about what 219 is not a room could mean. The obvious physical answer was wrong. 219 was a room. I'd walked past it during my one trip upstairs. Standard door, standard lock, standard brass number plate. It was positioned at the far end of the hallway on the right side, second to last before the emergency exit. I'd noticed nothing unusual about it. But I'd also been focused on 215 that night and hadn't been paying close attention to anything else. On July 15th, I called Marin It was mid-afternoon, my time off, and I was sitting in my truck outside the Schimalt diner. I told her I'd been seeing ongoing status anomalies in Lodge Star and asked if she'd ever had a guest by the name of Renault. There was a pause, not long, maybe 2 seconds, and she said no, not that she recalled. I asked about the previous night shift employee. She said his name was Curtis, that he'd worked from the previous August through April, and that he'd left because he'd gotten a job closer to his family in Klamath Falls. I asked if Curtis had ever reported system anomalies. Another pause. He mentioned some things, she said. The system is old. We've had it looked at. I asked her if she'd ever been in room 219. The pause this time was longer, maybe 4 seconds. Then she said, Nathan, the rooms on the closed floor don't need to be your concern. Just correct any status errors and note them in the log. That's all you need to do. Her tone hadn't changed. Still flat, still managerial. But there was a boundary in the words that I recognized. I'd heard it from Patrice. I'd read it in the binder note. It was the same message delivered 3 different ways. Don't pursue this. Log it and let it be. I said, okay. We talked about a plumbing issue in room 108 for a few minutes, and then she hung up. That night I did something I'm not proud of. I told myself I was doing a routine building check, make something I could justify on paper, and I went back upstairs. This time I went directly to room 219. I brought a flashlight. The second floor right wing hallway was the same as before. Dark, exit sign green, red lock LEDs in a line. The stone smell was there again. Maybe slightly stronger than before, or maybe I was more attuned to it. I walked past 215 without stopping and continued to the end of the hall. Room 217, room 219, room 221 beyond it, then the emergency exit. I stood in front of 219 and looked at the door. It was identical to every other door on the floor. Same wood veneer, same brass handle, same electronic lock with its red LED. The number plate was the same style, brass, slightly tarnished, screwed into the door at eye height. 219. I put my hand on the door. It was warm. Every other door on that floor had been cold, or at least cool, consistent with the 55-degree thermostat setting. This one was warm. Not hot, just warm. The way a door feels in a building where the heat is running on a mild autumn day. Comfortable, almost inviting. I pressed my ear to it. And here is where I have to be very careful about what I report, because I've gone over this in my memory many times and I want to be honest about the limits of what I perceived. I heard something. It was not a voice. It was not a mechanical sound. It was rhythmic, very faint, and it pulsed. If I had to compare it to something, I'd say it sounded like the building's own HVAC system, but isolated to that one room and running at a frequency I'd never heard before. Slower, deeper, almost biological, like breath but not breath, like a pump moving something dense through something narrow. I tried the handle. It moved. The door was unlocked. I did not open it. I stood there with my hand on the warm handle in the dark hallway with the green exit sign at my back, and I made a decision that I have revisited more times than I can count. I let go. I stepped back. I walked to the stairwell, went downstairs, returned to the desk, and sat in my chair. Lodge Star was unchanged. No chime, no status update. Room 219 showed blocked. Same as always. The building was quiet. At 2:48 a.m., the encoder clicked. I didn't look at it. At 2:51, Lodge Star chimed. I glanced at the screen. Room 219, occupied. Guest name, D. Renault. This time the departure date was filled in. It was the same as the arrival date, tonight, both arriving and departing in the same night, in a room on a closed floor, in a building where I was the only employee, and the check-in had been performed by no one. At 3:15, the status changed again. Room 219, vacant, dirty. That was new. In all the weeks of anomalies, the status had only ever gone to occupied and then back to blocked by morning. Vacant, dirty was a housekeeping status. It meant a guest had departed, and the room needed to be cleaned and inspected before being returned to availability. It was a status that implied process. It implied that whatever had checked in had now checked out. I stared at the screen for a very long time. The cursor blinked next to 219, vacant, dirty. At 5:40, Patrice came in. I showed her the screen. She looked at it. She looked at me. For the first time, I saw something in her expression that resembled acknowledgement. Not surprised. She wasn't surprised. But she let me see that she understood. She said, I'll set it back to blocked. And then she said something she'd never said before. Oh, Nathan, how are you doing? I told her I was fine. She nodded and didn't press it. I went to my room. I worked the rest of July. The pattern continued. Status changes every 2 to 3 nights. Always the second floor right wing, guest name D or D, Renault. And now occasionally cycling through to vacant, dirty before reverting by morning. The encoder clicked. The phone rang from empty rooms. Once at 3 a.m. on a Tuesday, I heard 2 impacts from the ceiling. Not 1, but 2, separated by about 4 seconds. And the second one was lighter than the first, as though something heavy had been set down and then something lighter placed on top of it. I stopped going upstairs. I followed the instruction from the binder, the one from Marin, the one from Patrice. Correct the status, log it, move on. The note had said it never came downstairs. And in all those weeks, that remained true. Whatever was happening was contained to the second floor, to the right wing, to those rooms, to those hours. It observed the boundaries of its own pattern with a regularity that was almost courteous. Check in after midnight. Do whatever it did in the room or in the space that the room represented. Check out before dawn. Leave the status dirty. Allow it to be corrected. There was one more event. The last week of July, my second to last week before I'd planned to leave, I came on shift and found something on the front desk that hadn't been there when Oren left. A key card. White plastic, Brayburn Inn logo on one side. I ran it through the reader. It was encoded for room 219. The access window was open-ended. No start time, no end time. A permanent key. I put it in an envelope and put the envelope in the filing cabinet, in the maintenance closet, behind the binder, behind the bulb boxes. It felt like the right place for it. The next person would find it or they wouldn't. I finished out my last 2 weeks. The anomalies continued on their usual schedule. I logged them, corrected them, and sat at the desk, reading while the building did whatever the building did during those small hours when the system said someone was upstairs and the hallway said no one was. On my last night, August 21st, I cleaned out my room, packed my truck, and sat through the shift with the strange attentiveness of someone doing something for the final time. Lodge Star chimed at 1:38. Room 219, occupied. D. Renault. I looked at the screen, and for reasons I can't fully explain, I typed something into the notes field, the small text box under the guest record where you could add special requests or comments. I typed, "Thank you for staying with us." Then I closed the screen at 3:12. The status changed to vacant, dirty. At 3:13, the phone rang. Line 8. Second floor, right wing. I picked up. The open line. the ambient hum. And then, for the first and only time, something else, a sound that might have been a word, or might have been the building's pipes, or might have been the old PBX routing noise through the system in a way that resembled speech. A single syllable, soft, exhaled. It sounded like night. The line disconnected. I set the phone down. I corrected the room status. I wrote my final overnight log entry. All quiet. Systems normal. Patrice came in at 5:40. I handed her the key to my room, the overnight binder, and a post-it with my cell number in case anyone needed to reach me about anything. She took them. She said, "You did fine." It felt like the most genuine thing she'd ever said to me. I drove south through the early morning fog, past the National Forest boundary marker, past the turnoff for County Road 9, down to the valley where the cell signal returned, and the radio picked up a station from Klamath Falls, playing soft rock at low volume. The Brayburn disappeared behind me one curve at a time. I don't work in hospitality anymore. I took a job with a county parks department doing trail maintenance, which is outdoor work with a crew in daylight, and that suits me. I think about the Brayburn sometimes, not constantly, but in the way you think about a place where something important happened that you never fully understood. I think about D. Renault, a name I couldn't verify, attached to a presence I couldn't see, checking in and out of rooms that were supposedly closed, on a schedule as reliable as the tide. I think about the note in the binder, written by someone who'd reached the same conclusion I had, that the correct response was not investigation but accommodation, that whatever was happening on the second floor of the right wing was not a problem to be solved. It was a pattern to be maintained, a routine that predated me and would outlast me, carried forward by whoever sat at the front desk next. And heard the encoder click and the phone ring from an empty room and the soft chime of a system registering a guest who would never walk through the lobby. The thing I keep coming back to, the detail that I still turn over late at night when I can't sleep, is the door to 219. Warm while every other door was cold, unlocked while every other door was sealed. The sound behind it, that's that slow, rhythmic pulsing that wasn't mechanical and wasn't organic and wasn't anything I could match to any system in the building. I stood in front of it with my hand on the handle, and I chose not to open it. I chose to walk away. That choice felt right at the time, and it still feels right. But I think about it the way you think about a road you didn't take, not with regret, more with the awareness that the road is still there, and the door is still unlocked, and whatever is on the other side is still pulsing in that dark, warm room at the end of the hallway, waiting with the patience of something that has checked in 1,000 times and has never once been greeted. Marin emailed me in October. Short, professional. She said the new night person had started in September and was working out well. She asked if I'd left a composition notebook in the filing cabinet. I told her no. I don't know if that was the right thing to say, but it was the same thing everyone before me had done. Leave just enough behind for the next person to find. And not so much that they'd refuse the job. The binder in the maintenance closet, the comment card in the desk drawer, the key card in the envelope, the log entries that didn't quite match the official story, breadcrumbs left by a line of people who had all independently arrived at the same quiet understanding. You don't explain it. You don't stop it. You don't open the door. You sit at the desk and you do your job and you let it check in. And when morning comes, you set the room back to blocked and you go to sleep. And you try not to think about what kind of guest leaves a room vacant dirty when nothing was ever there to begin with. The trail crew starts at 7 a.m. I'm in bed by 10 most nights now. The apartment I'm renting in Chiloquin has thin walls and I can hear the neighbor's television through the plaster. And sometimes, right at the edge of sleep, the murmur of the TV sounds like an open phone line, ambient hum, no voice, present, and waiting. It lasts a second or two. Then a laugh track kicks in or someone changes the channel and the resemblance collapses and I'm just a man in a small apartment in a small town, listening to ordinary sounds in an ordinary building where every room is exactly what it appears to be. Most nights that's enough.